Endgame. A short story from the Unwitting Conspirator series. The off-white shell cracked open, releasing warm, yolky light to pour into the otherwise dark hallway. The illuminated vector exposed tiled flooring in grave need of an update, along with flowered wallpaper resting between the closed mouths of surrounding apartments. Mariana's slender form slipped into the concourse and closed the door with care. She looked both ways down the dead corridor. Her eyes shifted through the surroundings as the lock clicked behind her. Her hand lingered on the knob for a moment longer. With a deep breath, she tiptoed over the space, standing between herself and the concrete staircase. This is the last time. It has to be the last time. She promised herself, only to cross the thought out and insert an I hope or maybe between the lines for good measure. A shiver ran down her spine, all the way to the feet she'd stuffed into kitten heels she would otherwise not have worn. They were completely out of her normal character. If she'd done her homework properly, she was certain she'd come to the final rung in the ladder. After tonight, she could wash her hands of this God-forsaken gutter, once and for all. She held her clutch close, as if guarding its contents. The text had been urgent. Most of them were, but this one felt different. She picked up the pace, nearly tripping over the final stair as her rushed steps echoed through the passageway extending 5 stories above her. She picked up the pace, nearly tripping over the final stair as her rushed steps echoed through the spiraling passageway that extended 5 stories above her head. I can't keep this up. I don't know if I can do this. Panic mixed in with the anxiety gnawing at her gut. The cocktail sent her lurching forward, as if she might lose the dinner she'd eaten just hours before. Mariana almost turned and ran back the way she'd come before balling her fists. She stared at the exit, taking a few deep breaths until she was steady on her feet once more. You know why you're doing this. Her intuition shot back. She would have done the same thing for you if you'd been brazen and desperate enough to do what she'd done. Mariana clenched her teeth. Damn it, she hissed as she pushed open the steel door. A rush of cool air spilt in around her. The nausea passed as the brisk torrent swept her deeper into the midnight hour. Her phone vibrated. Mariana almost jumped out of her skin as the vibration pulled her from her thoughts, sending her reeling into the reality of what she was about to do. She fumbled her clutch in an effort to reach the device, nearly spilling the rest of the contents to the ground. She gasped and grabbed desperately around the metallic handhold tucked neatly away in her purse. She held it tight until she was sure it wouldn't fall. I only have one shot at this. She pictured the stakes, and suddenly, the world surrounding her went quiet. Mariana paused on the river of pavement and held the purse close to her chest while she pulled herself together. She gulped in air and glanced over the empty street to be sure no one had seen. She breathed out steadily and lifted her phone from the other contents. With a final look at the metallic centerpiece glistening in the streetlights, she closed the mouth of her clutch around it, as if what was left behind might have reached out and bit her had she not encased it. Anonymous. Your transport will pick you up at 5th and Northwest Street. Be there within 15 minutes. She stared at the glowing phone screen for a moment longer. Again, Mariana looked both ways, gathering her bearings as she brushed a few rogue wrinkles from the lower portion of her flowing, mid-thigh black dress. This is it. Get it together, girl. She let the command sink in. The intersection was 3 blocks from her current location. She glanced both ways a final time to be sure the midnight street was fast asleep. Satisfied she hadn't been observed, she set off at a brisk walk, her heels making more noise than she was comfortable with. Like most, she was so set on quickly reaching her destination, Mariana didn't think to look up. Had she might have noticed the lighted apartment 3 floors above, in the shadow resting in the highlighted window frame, watching as she made her way around the first turn in the sidewalk. "You must be Miss Dola. You're 5 minutes early," a heavy-set man called through the open window as he flung wide the door of the black-stretched sedan. Mariana pictured a mouth ready to swallow her whole. "Early is my favorite way to begin the night." He laughed too loudly. It sounded forced. Mariana was back on edge. The hairs at the back of her neck lifted like tiny red flags. Something was off. The man was dressed extravagantly. His mustache was shaped so perfectly it seemed to amplify its uneven spread. The difference in length from end to end would have been comical had it been on purpose. He smelt as though he'd dumped an entire bottle of cologne over himself. Not even the good kind. Mariana resisted the urge to hold her breath and smiled as sweetly as possible without grimacing. He waved her along and patted the seat beside himself. She tried not to pay attention to his greedy eyes, taking in every inch of her uniform for the night. She brushed a wisp of red hair from her face as she bent and slid into the black leather upholstery, closing the door reluctantly behind herself. "Well, you look ravishing, and that'll be a good thing, since tonight will require you to be a little extra." "What do you mean?" she asked. She could feel her heart in her throat, though her voice betrayed little of the internal battle taking place. How had Bianca done it? How had she made it seem so normal? How had she not fallen apart? "I mean, tonight is when you prove what you're made of." Vague and completely unhelpful, as usual. All of the handlers she'd met had seemed to fit the same type. Mariana took a deep breath. She pretended to look out the tinted window and closed her eyes as she collected her shattering persona. "Don't think so much." The silk voice laced in with her internal dialogue. It was as if her friend had been sitting right next to her, which she knew couldn't be the case, since Bianca was in 12 pieces and spread throughout the national forest just outside the city. Mariana looked back at the fat man poured into the seat next to her. His expression made her want to vomit. He was a pig. He fit perfectly into the mud he'd found. She offered him a steely, uninterested look to mask the internal battle raging just out of his reach. "What happened to Maximus?" She was relieved at the disinterest relayed in her tone. His belly expanded beneath the sport coat, whose buttons were threatening to give up the ghost as he laughed. It seemed as though they might pop away from their proper place should they encounter even a smidgen more pressure. A small smile crossed Mariana's expression at the thought. It was going to be a pleasure to follow through with her plans if he turned out to be the one she'd been looking for all of these months. The divided thoughts grew quiet as she narrowed in on her quest. This is it. He placed a hand full of sausage fingers on her leg and patted on the bare skin. His yellowed teeth glimmered in the low light. Your Maximus handles the pearls. I only tend to the diamonds. She grimaced. What a pleasure for you, she offered, again leaking disinterest. I try not to complain. He patted her leg again and left his hand to rest uncomfortably in place. The car ride was quiet for a time. 2 red lights later, he picked up conversation again, back to business. This client, his usual, has been out of commission for some time, and he has yet to find a product he's satisfied with, which is why it would be a real pity if you disappointed. Mariana picked up on the thinly veiled threat with ease. She looked out the window, hoping to mask the snarl forming over her lips. Out of commission? What does that mean? She fished. Pregnant? He laughed. Let's just say she'll no longer be of use to him or anyone else. Mariana's finger traced the outline of the contents in her purse. Why is that? She prodded, throwing caution to the wind. He chuckled darkly, grabbing her chin between his fingers and forcing her to look back at him. You're too smart to ask so many questions. That's why I chose you. This client likes them intelligent. He has... The man paused, offering a vicious smile. Particular tastes. In a lot of things, I'm told. Just don't ask the wrong questions. Do as you're told, and this'll go over quite well for you, I'm sure. Again, his eyes drifted outside of Mariana's comfort zones. She froze, not willing to say or do anything until he jerked his hand away. She immediately drew her gaze back to the window, choosing silence. Okay, we're almost to location. You'll go into the lobby bar, order a dry martini with 3 olives, and take them off the toothpick right away. Let them rest free at the bottom of the glass. He'll find you. Understood? She nodded. Again, more roughly than before, the man jerked her head back to look at him. I said, do you understand? His voice was tense. Yes, she replied shortly. Good. He let go and again placed his hand on her leg. Mariana almost didn't care if he was the mark or not at this point. It took all of the restraint she contained to keep from pulling the tool from her clutch and unloading on the bastard. The sedan slowed at the opening of a parking garage at the base of a tall building coated in glass. Mariana ducked her head to gaze up the side of the skyscraper until it disappeared behind the concrete walls they descended into. Okay, we're here. You know the drill. The man held out his hand. Mariana slapped her phone into his palm reluctantly. Once you're finished, you'll receive your personal effects. He held up her phone and shook it in front of her face. The vehicle came to a stop. The quiet purr of the engine was the only sound surrounding them as he motioned for her to exit and stuck her phone into the pouch at the back of the seat in front of him. Mariana didn't move. Well? He sounded impatient. She looked him over. He fit the description to a T. Bianca hadn't spared any details, down to the poorly formed cheap porn stash, as she called it, and the heavy cologne use. It had to be him. The last man Bianca had spoken to before she was brutally murdered and disposed of with so little care. Tossed into the trees like she was just a piece of trash. The murmurs from the other girls had confirmed the details Mariana hadn't been able to put together for herself. That was enough. She'd had enough. A flash of the schoolyard so many years ago crossed over her mind. Bianca standing over the bully who'd picked on Mariana mercilessly for 2 years before her knight in shining armor had shown up. A helmet of braids and a heart full of spunk and sass to match. Mariana's eyes filled with tears. "You getting cold feet?" the fat man snarled. His sausage fingers bit deep into her leg. She barely winced. "Actually, I have a question." Her laser focus bore into his skull. His curiosity distracted him from her feet, which had slipped from the kitten heels that had previously contained them. Mariana unlatched the door while unclasping her clutch as if reaching for lipstick. She rubbed her lips together as if prepping them for a reapply. "Okay." He rolled his hand in a continuous circle as if prompting her to get on with it. "You mentioned this client's previous taste." He lifted a brow and cocked his head, waiting for her to finish. Mariana made eye contact as her hand slid around the cold grip. Her finger laced into position as she clicked off the safety without notice from her current companion. She'd been preparing for this moment for 6 months. "Did her name happen to be Bianca, or Desiree, as you might know her?" The man's expression darkened. "That's none of your business." "Does your name happen to be Romaine?" His expression cycled through a rapid array of emotions, ranging from shock to surprise and then anger. That was all she needed. Before the pig of a man could launch himself toward her, she'd pulled the secret weapon from its place. The driver yelled warning, too late. The shot echoed through the parking garage, and Mariana didn't wait to see what happened next. She shot through the door and ran faster than she'd ever run in her life. Her bare feet slapped against the pavement. Tires screeched behind her, but she didn't look back. Mariana rushed from the mouth of the concrete tomb and bound in zigzags to the nearest alley, still clutching the weapon tightly. She ran until she couldn't feel her feet anymore, and finally, after she was certain she hadn't been followed, she collapsed behind a rust-covered dumpster to catch her breath. Next stop, the police station. Assuming they weren't in on the underground operation, she would turn herself in and tell them everything. It was done. She was finally finished. Tonight had been the last night. She erased the maybe and hopefully from her mind as tears of relief poured down her face.